Hello and welcome to another episode of Other Record Labels. I'm Scott Orr, and thanks for listening. Please subscribe if you haven't already. You can reach out to me at podcast@otherrecordlabels.com if you have any suggestions or questions. Very exciting. We haven't done seasons, so to speak, with this podcast. I've intended to just kind of keep the train rolling. However, if you are listening to this in sequence, thank you. But we're going to take a short little break over the Christmas holidays. If you're not listening to this in sequence, and this is irrelevant, and it's probably summertime in 2025 and whatever. But there is going to be one of the things I'm excited about, and there's some great episodes coming up, but I'm excited about shifting a little bit into talking with some people at record labels, always, who have a little bit of more of a specific focus in their role. And we're also going to camp out on some more specific subjects, just in case you thought, wow, 16 episodes later, I feel like I know a lot about record labels. I'm going to stop listening to this podcast. Well, don't do that. That would be a really dumb move. Thank you for listening today. A great label, Captured Tracks, and I'm talking with Mike Sniper. And this is an incredible label. I say that all the time, and I mean it all the time. I really do. But this was one of those times where, going through their roster and their old roster, and looking at, Craft Spells and Wild Nothing, the new artist Chastity, which is that's an incredible record, Widow Speak, and the new Molly Burch. Just looking through this label, Mac Demarco, of course, and just thinking, this is such an incredible label, and this conversation is not one to be missed. Let's talk about how you, the listener, can get 10% off this great ebook from Work Hard, Playlist Hard. I want to tell you, our label, Other Songs, has experienced some recent micro success with Spotify playlists. And I've said in the past that playlisting has become a focus for our label because it's something that I've noticed can expose you to a new audience, as well as generate some modest, consistent income for the label and for the artist. And the success we've had recently has been due in part to two things. Number one, this new feature that Spotify has announced a couple weeks ago, where you can actually pitch your music directly to their editorial staff, as well as an interesting feature that if you give them at least a week or two lead time on a single or an album, they will include one of your songs or your new song into the release radar playlist of your followers, all of them. And that's an incredible thing. And the other contributor to some of our success has been this ebook that I'm talking to you about from this third-party curator, Work Hard, Playlist Hard, and Mike, the guy there, is a genius when it comes to playlisting, and he's compiled a lot of his research and information and facts. The book is $10. You get an extra $1 off if you go to ebook.otherrecordlabels.com and use the coupon code OTHER. It really helps us out, and I think you're really going to like this book. Well, we actually talked about this on the podcast before, because, we're a bunch of labels talking to each other and labels sharing information. And it's like the idea of competition between labels is so ridiculous because, there's never and it's not like we're two roofing companies. There's not like a music fan who is holding one record in one hand and the other, and like saying, sell me on which one I should buy. You know what I mean?
The competitive nature of it is only very brief when, let's say, there's an artist that multiple labels want to sign.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
That's about it. Once that's decided, life basically moves on.
Yeah.
I'm not aware. We don't really go up to bat, pitching ourselves.
Right.
We generally just say, here's our first and best offer, and we want to work with people who are excited with us.
Yeah, totally.
And, artists should definitely get the best deal they possibly can. But I just don't really go too far down that road.
Right.
I want things to just kind of start at an equal enthusiasm level.
I want to talk about, obviously we're here to talk about Captured Tracks. According to your website, the name of the label came from a self-released EP of yours that fans mistook it as the name of your label. Is that right?
Sort of.
Okay.
Basically, I had a band called Blank Dogs, and it was a home recording project, but I had a band for it when I toured. And I had a bunch of songs that were a little bit more experimental than the typical stuff I'd release on records or 45s. And so I was like, well, there's enough here to make kind of an interesting tour CDR. And it was called Captured Tracks Volume 1. I don't know where that name really came from. It just kind of, I didn't really think too hard about names.
Yeah, it's great.
And then it was being assembled by my friends Cassie and Katie from Vivian Girls. They were putting together these CDRs. They were kind of cool looking CDRs. They had a silkscreen jacket and stuff. And so they were putting them together for me. And I was going to put out the first two 12 inches, and I was wondering what label I should call it. And then Cassie from Vivian Girls was like, why don't you just call it Capture Tracks? And that CDR could be, that's kind of, so it was kind of accidental.
Yeah.
And so that CDR came out, and I wasn't aware at the time that would be the label, but that came out not on a label, but now it's kind of seen as our first release.
Oh, okay. The Volume 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great name. It's a really great name. So what now? Okay, so you wanted to self-release your own stuff, is that right? Like, how did the label form originally?
Well, it wasn't necessarily a huge desire to release my own stuff. It was, I'd had a couple of really small labels that only lasted a little bit. One was a purely reissue label called Radio Heartbeat, and I had a partner in that, and it just kind of dissolved. And I had gotten more interested in current music again. I was kind of dissatisfied with independent music for the majority of the late 90s, early aughts, and mid-aughts. And then I started touring and hearing bands that I really liked again. And I was working as a buyer and pricer at Academy Records in Brooklyn. It was actually the same time that Caleb from Sacred Bones was doing the same thing there. And we started our labels around the same time.
Wow.
So I actually put out a 12-inch on Caleb's label, and then I did a couple other records. And at that point, I knew enough about distribution from working at record stores and from touring that I decided, well, I might as well just start putting out new music that I wanted to release myself. Not only my own music, but other people's music.
How did you know you had a knack for the business side of music?
I had no idea. It was just a matter of
how did you have the confidence?
Trial and error. Well, I mean, I had some sense of, I guess I have a natural business acumen. Most of my family are or were entrepreneurs at some point, and just no fear, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, a big part of that is becoming an entrepreneur, is fully investing yourself in something with the possibility of failure.
Right.
Is the most important part of starting a record label, more so than obviously having a good ear and, knowing a good artist when you hear one and a direction for the label. But really, if you're not willing to invest yourself and throw yourself fully in it, then it's never going to amount to where you want it to be. There's very few situations where someone kind of stays at a day job while also having a big record label. I don't know if it ever happens.
Right. Right.
It's kind of like you just have to take the plunge fully and invest everything to it. So I had saved up some money, and I was still working and still touring when I started the label. And then actually when I saw that it was getting to the point where I could live off it, I quit my job and I quit touring. So
that must have been a pretty fulfilling moment.
Sort of. I mean, in the back of my mind, I'd always wanted to have a record label, but it wasn't something that I thought would ever grow to what it is now. Because I kind of, post-college, I got myself involved in as many different things I was interested in as possible. So I was doing a lot of illustration work, actually. I went to art school. And so I was doing illustration work for shows and for artists, for record labels and stuff. So I did some work for Jay Retard and Dead Moon and Black Lips, stuff like that. So that was a little bit of how. At the same time, I was touring in a punk band, and but I was also doing. I've always been interested in used records, and I always wanted to own a record store, and I was flirting with the idea of just being an illustrator, and I was kind of waiting to see which thing took off first.
Yeah. One of the things I like about the record label environment is, and this is a question for you, is does running a record label allow you to kind of play in all those different little sandboxes?
It did at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I did most of the layout and flyers and all that kind of stuff myself. Then, as time goes, now we're a large enough company where I've kind of sourced myself out in terms of employees and what everybody else does.
Right.
Now we have 2 designers on staff.
Wow.
We have 3 project managers, a product manager, finance manager. We have, we have like a staff of 13 now. So,
wow. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it freaks me out all the time. But that includes things that are tangentially related to the label too, like the shop and the warehouse.
Yeah.
But I've actually tried lately to try to get back into that, the creative aspect of, because the weird thing is once you get to this point, as a business owner, not only as a label owner in a music industry, but I talk to other business owners, and at some point it almost is where when by the time something gets to me, something's wrong.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's
so
right.
I'm dealing with damage control all the time, or hey, we don't know what to do at this point, or there's some kind of the fire to put out or something like that, or I started the fire maybe.
Right.
And so I'm trying now to get invested back into the more creative aspects of the job.
The fun stuff.
Yeah. It would be nice.
What? So you started it in? Was it 2009?
2008.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, happy anniversary.
It's our 10th anniversary.
Oh, that's great.
We started announcing.
You know what? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later because I did see some of the repressings and the pressings that you have announced. But what was the?
I think it goes like Mexican Summer, then Sacred Bones, then Us.
Oh,
it's like each year is a 10-year anniversary. But we each have like 6 months on each other or something like that. But sorry, go ahead.
It's a huge accomplishment. Do you feel it? Are you proud of it?
I do, but it's not that. It's not like luck. It's hard work.
No, of course.
And partnering with the right people and investing in the right things. I think I do wish there were more labels that kind of stuck it out that came around the time that we did or afterward. But it seems that people try for 3 or 4 years and stop. But it took us. I had a little bit of a leapfrog, so I had known a lot more people who were in pretty successful bands. Before we started signing bands, we would do one-off records. So, for example, I knew John Dwyer for a long time, so doing an OC's LP was not an issue. And I realized for their 23rd release, not many labels have that, connection where you can. I know that I'm going to sell X amount of those, and it allows me to then, take more chances too. But nepotism isn't going to be that far. John wouldn't let me put out a record if he thought I was an idiot.
Yeah, it's true.
So
what was the music industry like in 2009? Looking back,
streaming wasn't really around.
Yeah,
it was pretty much iTunes was pretty much owned digital. There were other places that were trying. Most of them are not around anymore. What
was vinyl like in 2009? It's hard for me to remember. It was good.
Yeah, all this bullshit where people say of talking about peak vinyl and sales being higher than ever. It's not true. It's basically people started tracking vinyl sales more.
Ah.
Back in 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009, there were a lot of records that sold tons and tons and tons on vinyl, but they weren't being sound scanned.
Right. Oh, interesting.
Mostly also because major labels weren't putting out vinyl, and the indies weren't bothering. The smaller indies weren't bothering with sound scanned, or
Right.
neither were the independent record stores. So a J Retard Blood Visions or Black Lips Let It Bloom, like those records that came out on In the Red, they weren't doing sound scan, and they sold tons and tons and tons of vinyl.
Wow.
But it won't show up because basically once the major labels started getting involved again, and if you print Pink Floyd, Rolling Stones, Beatles, Prince, and Neil Young records, people will buy them, and so you have this huge like bell curve of, oh my God, vinyl sales are back. And
interesting.
Like they never went away.
Yeah.
And people that are talking about peak vinyl where it's going to go down, it's like, well, how many times can you sell them Sgt. Pepper?
Yeah.
Yeah, to me,
that's true.
It's always been stable.
Interesting.
Having worked at a record label distributor right out of college and then working at a record store, I mean, it never went down. It's just that it started getting reported, and people started to, once the major labels started putting it in their sound scan, then Billboard reacts away, so you get all these stories about it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's fabricated.
It's a lot of clickbait. You're right.
Yeah, and then people worrying that it's going away. It's like, well, I'm not worried.
That's good.
The time to worry about it is long come and gone.
Right.
It's. I think major labels will stop selling as much as they're currently selling because they're pricing themselves out.
Right.
You can't buy. They haven't figured out how to make a record and get it in a shop for less than $30.
It's true. Yeah.
And if you can't, how many copies are you going to sell once you figure that out? And then our records are right next to it, and they're 18.
Right. Yeah.
There's nothing different about our two records.
Yeah.
They're made at the same manufacturing plant. So, yeah, I mean, so we started doing, when the first couple 12 inches came out, I wasn't even doing digital, I don't think. So we really only started doing digital seriously in late 2009.
And that was iTunes?
Yeah.
Primarily?
There was other,
Sure.
there was eMusic. And
yes, I remember eMusic, yeah.
But iTunes was like the big dog or whatever. Things started really changing around the time where we had signed Beach Fossils, Wild Nothing, Widow's Peak, and Soft Moon in pretty quick succession. And their LPs all came out. Their first LP, like Beach Fossils and Wild Nothing's first LPs came out on the same day. In May,
my goodness.
In 2010.
I think I read that somewhere, yeah.
And then that kind of was the big, pushed it over the top for us. So that was mid 2010. So before that, we were in a boutique label. But
was that like in I would never do that. I would never release two records on the same day, primarily because I couldn't keep up with the demand or the need to push both.
I want to do it again.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask, was it a mistake?
It used to be pretty often.
Really? So it was intentional and everything.
So like Sub Pop or Matador, they'd have big release days with two big releases on the same day. It was a way to get people into shops to buy both products.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
I could see it
that way to some extent. Like we would never do it ourselves, but it's not the worst thing in the world for a record to come out for a couple big records to come out on the same day. There's obviously a competitive nature to that, but it does drive people to the shop to buy multiple.
Sure.
So they might take more chances than normally as opposed to go to the store to buy one record. I'm sure it hurts I think streaming probably killed that, which is weird because it seems kind of ironic that basically the free access to listen to whatever the hell you want has created more of a monoculture than.
That's right. Yeah, because I was going to say I think it would be beneficial in the streaming environment because it's a buffet, and so on Friday mornings I usually add 5 or 6 albums to my library.
Yeah. Well, I think it's mostly in the eyes of pitch people. Like,
yes.
Digital marketers, like how much space are you going to incorporate on the app, right? So on the day of release on Spotify, do we have? Oh, we lost out to whatever. I mean, it's not part of my job anymore to really I have a guy who does our digital marketing now. But I mean, that I think has changed. A lot of things recently have changed up the way release dates come about. It used to be a little bit more. You could have a little bit more fun with it.
Do you think, one of the things I feel like, being just a small time set up, and I feel like every year I get the hang of one thing like playlists or vinyl pressings, and then all of a sudden everything changes or something becomes oversaturated and super competitive, and I have to relearn how to promote records again.
That's how it works.
Okay, thank you.
There's no like secret.
Oh, I was going to ask you, does more established labels, do you become more stable? Are you less affected by that?
Well, I mean, my frustration, I wasn't frustrated at them, but I had frustration with the fact that Matador and Domino and Sub Pop and all these labels that I really respected and looked up to had this vast catalog that they could rely on forever, essentially.
Yeah.
And so if in our first couple of years of existence, every release had to work in the scope that we saw it fit and cost the exact amount that we had available.
Right.
Because I didn't have the luxury of pavement albums or anything like that in my catalog that are just constantly evergreen. And
yes, yeah,
that's a hard part of growing a label. And they had to do this. They had to deal with the same stuff. I'm not saying that they don't deserve it because they not work to make that catalog, but it was definitely a struggle for us. And only recently have we really felt the benefits of the catalog. And that, I think, is the only thing that the perseverance, because the industry is constantly going to change, but as long as you have a strong catalog, no matter how people are digesting music, it'll take you over the hump through all the difficulties of fallow years and changes that are unexpected in technology and the way consumers react.
That's really great advice. And I've talked about this a couple times on the podcast, but I have seen that one of the cool things about streaming is that it sort of does away with the newness of an album or the release date or the importance of a release date, where somebody could listen to one of our singer-songwriter tracks, 6 years later on a study podcast or on a study playlist, and they wouldn't care that it's 6 years old or 8 years old. And I think that's great.
Streaming and sync licensing, if you're lucky enough to get it, those are both things that are beneficial to in that way.
Okay, so according to your website, your first bands who were unknown at the time, you said Wild Nothing, Beach Fossils, Soft Moon. What do you attribute to their success and their ascent from when they started with you, they were new and unknown, to where they are now?
Yeah, that's that was a two-way street. I mean, I for that period of time, I just had a lucky ear that was not only it was like the second wave of this indie rock renaissance, right? So from the late 90s, when you had the Strokes and the Walkmen and all that stuff that was happening in downtown New York, and then you had what was happening in Chicago with post-rock, I felt that the early and mid-aughts, while there's some exceptions, it kind of got a little stale, and there was not enough punk or I don't mean like punk rock. I just mean there wasn't enough. It was all too kind of formulaic and a little too nice, right? In a weird way. And there was other kinds of music had come and taken up what kind of like what's happening now again. It's a cyclical thing where other forms of music come in and take the most exciting musicians and people who follow music. They got into noise and underground hip hop and house or techno or what have you. And then around 2006, 2007, I found that indie rock kind of got a little bit influenced from the garage and punk scene, where there was this confluence, bands like Tyvek and Times New Viking and J Retard and Black Lips that were kind of hovering in both areas and still touring small DIY spaces. Then you had all these bands spring up in all these different towns. So like Atlanta there was Black Lips, but then there was also Deer Hunter, and New York kind of had the scene that was Woods and Crystal Stills and Vivian Girls, and which sprang out of, there was already a space for that music that Todd P had helped create with all the DIY spaces, and when they were doing shows for DFA and mostly noise artists and stuff. Those two scenes kind of merged. And so it was a really good time. And then Beach Fossils and, let's say, Real Estate were kind of in the second wave of that.
Yeah, I remember that.
So like the pioneers, whatever you would say, of that little guitar scene in New York and Brooklyn. And I had been touring and seeing like the Fresh and Onlys and becoming friends with all these bands. Mm-hmm. It just seemed like the right time for people. People were interested in this kind of music, which seems crazy to say that people really weren't interested in 2 to 3 minute indie rock songs with guitar or synthesizer even, because we had electronic music from the beginning. If it had, like, there was a clear divide between what was punk and garage, what was indie. So anyway, I'm kind of riding on that, and Wood System had been around for a little bit. And so Beach Fossils was originally going to be signed to both Wood System Capture tracks. I remember this now. And which was weird. Wound up not happening that way, thankfully. And we just signed them ourselves. And Wild Nothing, they actually knew each other, but I didn't know that when I signed Wild Nothing.
Wow.
They're both from Virginia, and they're roughly the same age. And their girlfriends were each best friends. It was weird, and it was just happenstance.
Yeah.
So I think Pitchfork was a little bit late to the party on all that stuff, right? So they didn't even give Let It Bloom or Blood Visions a formal review till well after they came out, and they kind of caught up with Time Zoo Viking and Tyvek. So they were looking for what else is there, and that's kind of Real Estate and Beach Fossils and Wild Nothing all came in around that time. And then I just kind of like, well, it's great that people are interested in this kind of music that I'm interested in. So I just thought I'll just sign more bands that I like because it seems to be working.
Mm-hmm.
And so Soft Moon and Widow's Peak, although they don't sound exactly like those, I thought could fit in.
Yeah.
And kind of opened up from immediately that we weren't going to be, I mean, it's stupid to say that if you're a fan of Soft Moon, it's impossible to be a fan of Wild Nothing. I'm not saying that it's like, wow, they sound so different. But like we tried at the beginning already to have it be a little bit more open-ended.
You're talking about a little bit about like this boom in like indie guitar music. It's reminding me of this, and we were already kind of debunked one story of the death of vinyl or the peak of vinyl. But there has been like a dialogue of the death of the electric guitar that's happening in the last like couple of weeks.
That's so ridiculous.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that?
That'd be like saying the death of the cello.
Right.
Like, how can there be the death of an instrument?
Yeah.
I don't care. I mean, it's just, it's
just
kind of like radicalized headlines, which are
totally
trying to grab, just also people that are trying to make stances in their opinions about music. If you don't like guitar-based indie rock, that's fine, but the end of the guitar is stupid because
I mean,
all kinds of music uses the guitar.
Well, as soon as you say the death of the guitar, then people are going to pick up a guitar and make music with it, because it's just the synths are just because they weren't being used and they were just kind of sitting around. And so if there's,
there was a time when people thought that no one would ever use analog synthesizers.
I think they were thrown in the garbage, probably.
So it's just.
Yeah.
It does. It's just that as you stick around the music scene long enough, you just notice that everything is cyclical.
Right.
This is right now what we're going through is very similar to me to, let's say, the late 80s, where the underground scene was kind of, you had bands like REM. This is like pre-Nirvana, right? That were kind of becoming huge rock bands who came from the independent music scene. But also this strong desire for underground bands to cross over. Whereas before that, and also in like the mid 90s independent scene and the 80s independent scene and the mid aughts independent scene, we're all very much happy to be independent. And the artists and the labels and everyone were happy to carve out their share and make it what they want. And then every 10 years or so, this happens where there's this strong desire, there's a hatred almost for the sounds of whatever independent music are, and to say that commercial music is better for whatever reason. And, you know, that's where we are right now. I mean, I feel like, you know, it's almost like we're back in the pre-rock and roll era. Not because...
yeah, Tin Pan Alley.
Yeah, it's like Frank Sinatra and
Mitch Miller.
Like Patty Page. Where you have these, they're kind of the Kanyes and the Beyoncés of their day or whatever. I mean, they're talented artists, but they're more, it's people buy into their personality, and they're also in movies, and it's this cross-social thing that's not really related to youth at all. Yeah. Whereas it's not a youth culture. The current music culture is not youth culture. And like, to me, that's kind of where people can, anyone who thinks that they're in a golden age of music because people who are my age are listening to the same thing that people in their teens are, something's wrong, which is what it was like because you know, Elvis Presley and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis, and that kind of started youth culture where music had never been for youth before. Yeah. We've only really had a record industry in a sense since then. And really LPs only since the 60s. So I mean, streaming is kind of like, we're kind of like in the 78 RPM days of streaming. We're at the very beginning of streaming. No one knows exactly what's going to happen. No one's made the huge breakthrough to see where it's going to go. And to me, the problem is that people don't see music, and this is related to what you're asking, even though I'm going off on a big tangent.
It's good. I love it.
People don't really see music as the cultural, they don't see it as what is defining the culture. Whereas in the early 90s and the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, it definitely did. And in the mid 50s when rock and roll started. So you had various kinds of culture underneath that, you know, but you would go and at any point in time, it'd be like a record would come out, it would be a big deal in the youth culture, and everyone would go home and listen to it with their friends or whatever, which could still happen right now with streaming. It's not like something that's impossible. To me, the main thing is that music is just not considered important in the culture the way it used to be. Like video games and you know, the internet and Twitter and social media and all these things taken over from it. And that's not to say that it's better or worse. It's just the reality to live with. So, I mean, that's to me is why we have the music culture that we have, and why someone like a Bob Dylan or a Neil Young or something like that won't have a number one hit, because it's not, the audience isn't there to make it a number one hit. And it's not just because they're guitar-based musicians. I could probably say the same whole bunch of other acts.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you don't have the infrastructure to have a Nirvana or to even have a Prince, really, you're not going to get one. You're going to have what we have instead. I mean, there are talented artists within what we've created, like Childish Gambino's new video and all that. I mean, that's taking the place of it. But it's like, that's a video, and it's a social thing, which is really cool. It's a message, and, you know, obviously there's music there too. It's different. What is happening with that is what would used to happen to a big release or something. Yeah. I think that the guitar-based music, to get back to the point, is kind of interwoven with that culturally as this thing that's what used to be important that isn't anymore and is now passé. Is not because of the instrument itself. It's just because what the music represents. You know, it's kind of thrown in with that idea. And so, you know, there will always be fans, people who like guitar-based music, trust me. They sell a lot of records. I mean, even if they don't get any placement on Pitchfork, like the demographic for Pitchfork has completely changed on purpose. And it's not being driven towards that anymore, but if you look at large venues, see who's selling them. There's bands you've never heard of who are guitar-based bands that aren't getting, you know, they're not PR darlings because they don't have a story, and they don't have like there's nothing within the social hemisphere that is part of what they're talking about. I mean, even with our own bands, I mean, Dive and Mac DeMarco get far more coverage because of their personality. I mean, I love their music, obviously.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point.
But it's their personality that kind of, you know, dictates why them and not someone else on the label who I feel's music is equal.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to argue with it. You know, these private companies are allowed to talk about whatever the hell they want to talk about. It's the readership doesn't seem to want to veer elsewhere, which I'm surprised with. Being someone who came up, I'm a Gen Xer, you know, and I came up trying to find music magazines and trying to like staying up for 120 minutes and listening to all the college radio I can and tape trading, and remember back then thinking like, wow, one day there'll be a technology where everyone can listen to whatever the hell they want. It won't be so difficult to hear about this stuff. And here we are, and the irony of that is that it's gotten probably even worse. Because
that's interesting. Yeah, good point.
You used to have, I was reading an article which was really funny. I think it was either Joe Strummer or maybe not Joe Strummer. Maybe it was like Rob Halford from Judas. Anyway, they were complaining about like, oh, it sucks. Like if you don't get a good review in Sounds, Melody Maker, or NME, you're screwed. It's like, oh my God, there used to be 3 places, you know? There used to be 3 places. And that's just in British press. So you also had like Cream and Rolling Stone and all these places in the States where, and of course, college music ratings would matter and all that kind of stuff. And the scary thing about it is, to me, and it's not to turn it into an episode of Black Mirror or something, but once we've put the limitless opportunities for people to listen to whatever the hell they wanted to listen to, it turns out they want to be steered more towards what to listen to, which I found it's kind of terrifying, but
interesting, yeah.
But I mean, this is the world we navigate, and you have to find your way around it and find your audience. And until someone figures out, I don't even know if it will be a website, but what the next Pitchfork will be. I mean, currently it's basically YouTube and Instagram.
Yeah.
Have, you know, that then because Pitchfork aren't really, their directives aren't what they used to be in terms of what I assume goals are and stuff. And the problem is that it's not their fault, but no one came up to like try to offer a varying opinion and do the same thing. Why can't there be 4 websites or 5 or 10 that have a following, that are like premiering 10 tracks a day and giving reviews to 5 albums? It's a pretty easy formula to follow. Yeah. And all these labels still are creating these assets. Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting here making videos for what? What are we making videos for? Who are we pitching them to? Yeah. I mean, you make them now almost as a artistic gesture and something to do with the band to help their touring, or just think of a way to do something. But in reality, it's, where are we putting this? Yeah. And just up on your own YouTube channel. Places don't even host videos anymore.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, it's really interesting. Well, I love your perspective from you know, throughout the years and talking about the industry, because it's what's fascinating as I read back to, you know, to the Sun Records days and to the Tin Pan Alley, and you realize how short this whole thing has been. You know, the music industry as we know it is younger than our parents in some respect, and it's like it's really interesting. I remember when people were talking about that iTunes spelt the death of the album, and it's like, well, the album was only like 25 years or 30 years at that point. Like it wasn't, you know, it's like we didn't even, it's not like it lived for centuries, you know, before us. Right. And
well, it's become an artistic expression that I don't think will ever go away.
I think it's great. Absolutely. Yeah,
not just because of rock and roll. When people say, like, I was once giving a talk at NYU, and another label head, who I will not mention, was like, I predict this was like 5 years ago. It's like, I'll predict the album will be dead in like 3 years. And I said, well, you're wrong. And I think there's no way, because If you're talking about music that's always been singles based, sure. I mean, because there is music that has always been singles based and will continue to be. Like dance music has always been singles based. You have people that are making great dance albums on purpose, but in reality, it's always been like dance as pure dance music and also pop dance music has always been singles based market. That's never changed. The fact that it's kind of held that dance and hip hop have pretty much held the top part of singles for almost a decade now. That's because that's what people listen to. It's not because it's albums. It's like I said before, it's very much similar to what it was like pre-Elvis. This is exactly the same situation we were in then.
Yeah.
And but at the time, you still had Miles Davis and John Lee Hooker and all these people making records and music and jazz more so than any other idiom took to the album before anybody else did. It was really where it became a full expression.
Right.
So it's a little bit, I would say, an uneducated thing to say that it's the death of the album, because that's just kind of thinking only in realm of like rock and roll. And rock and roll also, whatever subgenre of rock and roll, you also need, people will always be held up and judged by an album, right? As a singer-songwriter, it's almost like why are baseball seasons 162 games and why is football season 16 games? It's, well, because it's a history and we need to judge people based on their efforts versus history.
Yeah.
And you can't, well, this guy's a great fucking, he's a songwriter for the ages. He's up there with Paul McCartney because he had this one hit. That's not, people who are, you're always going to have albums for that sense where this is practice of touring and then you get home and you have a bunch of songs. This is no matter what kind of music you're making. You go into the studio and you make your next 10 to 15 songs. You choose what the album's going to be, and then you go promote it, and you try to make the most artistic expression of that last year you had as possible. People who predicted that it's the death of the album obviously have never been in a band and never toured.
Right.
And the band doesn't have to be a rock and roll band. It's like, it's pretty dim-witted.
Well, yeah, no, it's I never really believe that, and I think you have the younger people in their 20s or even in their 30s who are in bands right now. They grew up on albums, and that's what they admire. And it's like the history thing you're talking about with sports. It's that these are people who grew up with OK Computer, and they're trying to make their version of that.
Yeah, right. Well, that's another subject. I think that on the converse side of that is crowdsourcing and the ability for anyone to make a record and release it. It does have a negative effect on especially guitar-based music. The vetting process of independent labels and self-releasing, having it cost money, did do a lot of damage control. Right. Because if you can start a label with $0 and just have and I love Bandcamp to death as a company, and Kickstarter too. I think they're both great, but the problem that arises is that like anyone could just put 10 songs together, and I have or 40, and be like, I have 4 albums on Bandcamp, aren't I great? And it's like, it's cool that you're able to share your music with that like that, but the echo chamber is insane,
right?
And the process of really what a record label, like when someone's like, I'm going to start my own label. Well, you brought up Radiohead. They did that, and then they went back to XL. So that's kind of like a case study in and of itself. Like, what if Radiohead can't do it?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, not to say that people shouldn't try, and a lot of them will be successful starting their own record labels. Like, once you get to that point that you can. The problem is that if no one's there to help do all the work that you shouldn't be doing, like record labels and managers and booking agents, they're there so that as an artist, you're free to write your songs, record your songs, and go perform your songs live.
True.
And then to also work aesthetically on what your ideas are you're trying to get across, what are the visuals, and what are the things that are exciting to an artist, what they should be thinking about. And the record label's supposed to do all these other things. So that is, I can go on forever about that. Basically, whenever I get asked to do a music conference these days, that's always the subject. And they're like, hey, Mike, we'd like to invite you to Australia to speak on this panel. I'm like, let me guess. why do labels exist? Oh, how'd you know? This is what everybody asks me. But I mean, you find that the self-releases that actually work are few and far between, and the success stories are when someone's picked up from doing a few self-releases and they move on to a larger indie or a major label.
Well,
but I think there's just too much music, and I think bands need to like MySpace, for all of its problems, the beauty of it is that you can only put up 5 songs.
Oh, right. That's right.
And it forced people to like put up quality music.
I remember that.
And that's when I found all those bands. I mean, now when I get, hey, go to my SoundCloud, it's like 60 songs.
Yeah, what do you listen to? Yeah, it's true.
You're supposed to start playing lots of shows.
Right.
Get your band together and have 2 or 3 pretty good recordings of songs when you start talking to someone like me. Not a bajillion poorly recorded songs, and you play one show.
Right. This is a good segue. I want to ask you about your demo policy, because the first thing you say, and I think this is really cool, the first thing you say is you're not looking for bands that sound like bands on your current roster, which isn't always obvious to young indie bands. Like they think, I made a lo-fi record that sounds like Mac DeMarco. I should send it to Mac DeMarco's label.
So many of those.
A drum machine and a Juno and electric guitar.
On our other label, Cinderland, he's getting the same thing. And it's
Can you expand that concept a bit?
Sure. I mean, we definitely. Look, I'm happy that in our early days we had Wild Nothing and Minx and Crap Spells and Blouse, and there was. But we also had all these other, like Naomi Punk and stuff like that was different. Soft metals and these purely electronic bands and stuff. And I understand that the bands that had that sound sort of had I'd be stupid to think that didn't kind of draw in a certain type of audience.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with it still. I mean, look, I'll sign a band that sounds something like Blouse or something like Beach Fossils or Dive, but you better be that good. And the fact is there's not that many bands that are that good. And not only that, but that's only half the battle. There's the touring, the hard work that really is that I have no control over. There's so little that my label or any label can do for any band that's not going to play 75 to 100 dates in support of whatever album is coming out. Now, that's a lot of hard work, and it's, that's the reality, though. Between the bands who have been successful on our label and the bands who haven't, a lot of it has been the hard work that the other ones weren't either able to do or didn't want to do. And waiting for it to get cushy and make enough money from touring to start is not the way to do it. And I think that, I had lucked into a bunch of hardworking bands. I had no idea that Wild Nothing or Beach Fossils where I had a feeling Mac DeMarco would be hardworking because he did do a bit of touring when he had like cassette-only releases.
Right, and he's so prolific too.
Yeah, that I've kind of got to. Plus, he's Canadian; they're always hardworking.
Exactly.
And but yeah, I mean, the thing is, why would we only want to put out stuff that sounds like that? I mean, if there was labels that did that were successful at it, like say Creation Records or Slumberland's early days, and there was just a bunch of really good bands that sounded like that.
Yeah.
There was a scene, and the bands were playing together, and then the label started signing them, and then they heard another band that was great, like Discord, same thing, different kind of music. Early 4AD, same thing. Warp, all these things, these all developed from scenes with a bunch of talented people, and then. That's why you have a similar sound. The fact of the matter is, I just don't think there's that many bands that are that strong making that kind of music. I think I had the best ones, or amongst the best ones.
Right.
Like during that, like I wish we had Real Estate, but that was like, that's like one of my, and Kate LeBon, like Kurt Vile. These are people who I really respect as musicians that like would totally be on my label at that time had I gotten to them before these. Well, they're doing just fine, so I'm not worried about it, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, like that, those were the bands that are kind of to me, like, of the same scale. And I don't think anyone slipped under the covers, so to speak. No one came and went and weren't signed because their music was either amazing or they didn't put in the hard work of touring. Somebody might have put together. I have albums I put out that I think are great. People never toured, so what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, well, it was really, I mean, I was interested in that demo policy thing because it's, I mean, I've seen it before too. It's like, we're kind of a small singer-songwriter, folk singer-songwriter label. And so but I find myself when I'm looking for something for us that's next, I want something that's different. I want something that is like, an electronic singer-songwriter or, something that may be more experimental or drone. And, and I don't, it's
no, I hear you. Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You kind of, you don't get the good demos from those. I would love to put out, a purely experimental record, but I have to do all the footwork to find a really good one. I mean, I love that kind of music. I listen to it all the time. Just check my other label manufactured recordings for the reissues we do there. We do everything because I like everything. The fact of the matter is I don't get those demos.
Really? You just get Mac DeMarco demos.
No, I mean, we've done a lot of. We have signed artists off our demos recently.
I mean, it's a great policy. I mean, when people read through it, that's just the first point, but there's some really, really great points in there.
We signed Molly Burch and Lena Tolgren were both signed via demo submissions. And that was less than 2 years ago.
Wow.
And to me, they don't sound like anything else on the roster, either of them. Now, they're both female singer-songwriters, so they tend to get lumped together, which is so lazy. It drives me crazy.
Right. Yes, it's true.
They have nothing in common other than they play the same instruments. And
I'm really.
Whatever, that's a whole nother story.
I'm seriously amazed. Last week when I was going through your catalog, how many of these records I've come across myself over the past few years and loved so much. I was thinking All Yours, Nausea is a huge record. I love Craft Spells, the Wild Nothing stuff. Like, where do you? We were talking about demos and a little bit of MySpace. Where did you normally find some of these bands?
Well, MySpace at the beginning was amazing. It's funny to say that. But,
yeah.
Because when I started the label, I very quickly planned out 10 to 12 releases, and they did well. And so we started getting, that's how I found out about Beach Fossils and Wild Nothing, and Soft Moon, because I started getting ads. Basically, somebody would, you have 33 new ads, and then you look at them and see who's actually music artists. And if I liked the name enough and I liked the image they had, I would go to the page and check it out. So,
but that couldn't happen today. I mean, even if MySpace was still exist, just because you would be getting, and not just because Capture Tracks is so big, but you would, like the average person would be getting 5,000 a day.
Yeah.
And everyone has a band. Everyone,
Well, because now you can, everyone now knows how to home record. Whereas there was still a novelty to it in 2008.
It must be hard to be discerning then, is it not?
I don't think so, because the music's not good and the songwriting's like. To me, it's the songwriting. I'm always, and it's not just like, do you write songs as good as whomever?
No,
It's not that. It's more like composition. Because Soft Moon, I never considered. He doesn't like sit down and write a song. He's composing electronic music, let's say like dark electronic music, and the composition is there for the music he's trying to create. It's successful, and aesthetically, he already knew what he wanted to do. For me, I'd always respected labels that had a clear aesthetic in terms of what they look like 4AD early on, where all the art looked the same in Sacred Bones, and I respect that, but I knew Capture Tracks, I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be open-ended in terms of basically we're a service company to see through your aesthetic, right? So whatever vision you have for it, with our tweaking and bringing in people to clean it up and everything, and we like a lot of part of the deciding who to listen to is, do they have it all figured out? Like, the songs are good, the recordings don't matter that much. So it's the songs are good, they seem to have something figured out in terms of what their vision is, and they have their own thing. So like Lena Tolgren, for example, I mean, we opened up her demo. We liked the songs. I mean, she posted up a pretty haunting DIY video of herself just performing with an electric guitar. And it was like, oh, this is clear to me. We know what to do.
Yeah, right.
And when Molly Burch did this like amazing rendition of, I don't want to, these are Patsy Cline or a Tammy Wynette song where, you know, just her voice was like, oh my God, this is like a next level voice. And she's like writing her own material. It's kind of rare where you have somebody with a knockout voice that's also composing.
Right.
You tend to have, you know, it's very rare where someone is sort of where you have that raw talent of songwriting, which is, doesn't matter how long you know your instrument. Like you could be, you know, like Jimi Hendrix is one of the best electric guitar players of all time. People don't give him credit for what an awesome songwriter he is. He's one of those guys that had both talents. Neil Young, same thing. People forget how awesome of a guitar player he is because he's such a great songwriter. These are people that have both abilities, which is really rare. Yeah. So when you find somebody like that, you kind of just like, I'm not going to fuck with this.
Yeah.
She knows what she's doing.
Are you involved with the recording process ever with the records?
From an A&R standpoint, we'll make suggestions on early albums with whom to work with, generally based on where they are.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of those early recordings, we did a lot of work with Jarvis Tavernier because we trusted him and he was nearby and he did a good job and everyone was comfortable working with him. So that was when a lot more musicians could afford to live in Brooklyn.
Are bands sending you like mastered records and you're signing them, or are they sending you demos expecting to re-record?
Very rarely.
Which one? Very rarely. What do you mean?
Very rare. Like mostly we're getting demos.
Okay.
Molly Burch had almost an entire album recorded. It wasn't mastered yet, I don't believe. Maybe it was. But it's very rare.
Yeah.
Someone's at that point already.
The sad thing is with Bandcamp is that I've found that, you know, these people will make like a beautiful record in their bedroom or, you know, in a local studio, and then they'll upload it the next day to Bandcamp when it's like, oh, I wish you'd showed me that, you know?
Yeah, no, I have the same. Yeah, it's kind of frustrating.
I think that actually happened with, we were talking with 6131 Records, and that happened with Julian Baker's first record. She had put it up in like December on Bandcamp, and then they found it and then called her and she took it down, and, you know, the rest is history. Let me ask you, so you're coming up on 10 years. I saw something about the repressings that you guys are doing.
Yeah.
That's something you're like slowly rolling out?
Yeah, it's more or less some catalog items that some of them are out of print, and they're getting a little bit of a repress on a nice new color and stuff like that.
That's fun. Are you doing anything else? Any big celebration?
We're doing tours. So which we're focusing on our young and upcoming artists. So we're doing the show, and Brooklyn Brewery is hosting with us at Rough Trade here in Brooklyn. That's going to be B-Boys, which is a local band, Wax Chattels, who we're excited about. They're a band from New Zealand. It's going to be their first U.S. show. And this band Gel Set, who are on 2MR, our sister label, our electronic label.
Okay.
So that's like a show. And then there's the tour, which is going to be Morn and Chastity. They both have albums coming out at roughly the same time in June and July. So we're calling that the CT10 tour.
Oh, great.
And there's another tour that we kind of have planned, but where we haven't announced it yet because there's a lot of stuff to work out, the details and stuff. But I decided not to do a big festival thing because it's just too much work.
Yeah.
And it's only been 5 years since the last one.
Right.
So
right.
It's just kind of like, you can't do one every 5 years. It's just kind of, that's ridiculous.
I recognize a lot of the albums on your label, mostly from the artwork. There's a lot of, and you talked a little bit about how you were an illustrator, but there's a lot of covers here that have stood out to me over the past few years before I even kind of put the connection together that they're all on the same label. what role does album art have with your label? Because is it like a coincidence? Because all of your albums have such great art. I'm looking at the Bandcamp, and they're phenomenal.
Well, a lot of the people that work here, including myself, worked at record stores, and a lot of the artists that we work with have a visual background, but also we have two very talented people that do design and layout with us. And I'm really picky and persnickety about what an album cover is. So
yeah, me too.
I have the final say from the GM perspective, if it's all right or not. But we all have ideas about what the album cover should be like, and of course the artist has final say.
Yeah.
But I mean, yes, I think because we all come from a record store background, we're very, very into what it will look like when it's printed on 12 by 12, as opposed to what is this going to look like as a little square on a computer. And it's like, nothing bothers me more than font being too big and stuff like that. That's part of the digital age, you know.
Yes.
If you look at an older record, I mean, all the font is tiny. Yeah. And I like it that way.
Yeah. Or hand drawn, or yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that's why. But we think what is going to stand out at the record store. You know, even if you're trying to make a subtle looking cover, what's gonna actually like have people stop and wonder what it is, you know?
I like that thought process, because I've actually had quite a few arguments with artists about the importance of album art, because some artists are not that interested in it, and they say, I was talking with an artist last year, and they say, like, he said, it doesn't matter to me what an album art looks like when I'm listening to a record, and he's like, so I really don't care, And
they should care, because a lot of other people do.
Well, thank you. I'll let you tell. From the digital
perspective, even if you're not someone who listens to
right
media,
yeah,
your sleeve is up there with everyone else's on Spotify.
Yeah,
like when you had that kind of pastel fury of 2010 and 11, where every record was pastel, it was driving me crazy. And even our artists were like, I want to do something pastel. I'm like, God damn it, I'm so sick of pastel. Because it's just this wash, Yeah. And I tell people, like, go to a record store and tell me that this is going to stand out. Because right now you're looking at it probably in an email, on your iPhone or on your desktop, and has zero competition. It's not competing with anything in your space.
Right.
But like, go to iTunes, go to Spotify. Like, think about it that way.
Yeah.
Like, it needs to have some kind of. Being from, I went to Parsons School of Design, so whenever I hear an artist say that they don't care, I'm like, oh my God, heart attack.
Oh, absolutely. I'm with you there. Yeah, I know, I'm with you there. And that's I remember the Wild Nothing, the Nocturne album. Like, I remember seeing that years ago and just being like, I got to listen to that. It was.
Jack picked that out, and I had talked to the person in the photo. It was a self-portrait, and a lot of photoshopping.
Wait, which one are we talking about?
Oh, you're talking about Nocturne.
Nocturne, yeah.
Yeah. No, that one's complete. Yeah, that one was an interesting one. It was
beautiful typography.
Jack and I.
Boy, I bet you'd really like to know what happens next in this story. And I'm going to interrupt this conversation, not intentionally, but unfortunately, accidentally. Pro Tools had crashed. We recorded this actually in the summer of 2018, and Pro Tools crashed because I was so into this conversation with Mike. And just after this conversation of artwork, we flipped over to the grand finale of talking about Mac Demarco and how they discovered Mac Demarco and that relationship and how it blossomed. And I'm telling you, it wasn't recorded, and I'll never make that mistake again, and I haven't since. But it was a great conversation, and there was some really cool things I learned about how Mac came to sign to Capture Tracks. Now, and actually, as you're listening to this, Mac has now gone on to start his own label, which is another cool little thing. And maybe one day we'll interview him about that label. But I apologize that we did lose this, but all credit to Mike, because we had corresponded over the summer, and they've had an incredibly busy summer with some huge releases coming out, and not to mention their 10-year anniversary. And so all credit to Mike. We really tried to get back together to redo that part of the conversation about Mac, but we weren't able to make it happen. The summer was just so busy with family stuff. And then, of course, these guys released Chastity, a new record from Chastity. And then this fall, they released the new Wild Nothing record. And then, of course, some reissues that have been happening. Make sure you check them out at capturedtracks.com. And thanks to Mike for doing this, and thanks for being so kind and so responsive to my emails. I've since seen him in so many different publications. He's such a sought after dude. So I was so blessed to be able to talk to him for the hour that I was able to get this summer. And I apologize to you, the listener, that we lost the rest of the conversation. So 2 things I will do moving forward. Number 1, I'll always keep an eye on Pro Tools and make sure the clock is running, and I won't get so involved in the conversation that I forget that it's crashed. And number 2 is I won't save the juicy best stories for last. I'll in this case I did, and we missed out on that, and I apologize. Thank you so much for listening. Please check out our sponsor. It actually really, if you're interested in learning more about how to further your career as an independent artist, as a DIY artist, or as a DIY label who promotes records, check out ebook.otherrecordlabels.com. And that's something, checking out Mike Warner's book, I think would be really beneficial. And it honestly just helps us as well. The coupon code is OTHER. Thanks for listening.